Michael Walzer, the great political philosopher, once said that the challenge of America is to embrace its differences and maintain a common life. And that's the theme of my talk. It's going to be democracy and diversity. And I want to tell you when diversity kind of first made a powerful impression upon my life and on the way and the work that I do and the way that I decided to live my life. It's my first day on the campus of the University of Illinois, 15 or 16 years ago. I walk into the gym to play basketball, and I notice that there are 3 games going on. There's a black game, there's a white game, and an Asian game. And I'm asking myself, which game am I going to play in? And I realized something. All of my life, growing up in the western suburbs of Chicago, I have played in the white game. And not only that, I have shed the other parts of myself. I refused to learn Indian languages growing up. I refused to learn Indian cooking in order to play in the white game. And my whole college career after that became about the challenge of racial diversity, ethnic diversity. Why is it that some people feel so marginalized because of their color and because of their ethnic heritage? And I would go home and I would regale my father about, we're Indian, and why is it that we don't have more friends who are people of color? Why is it that you chose to move to Glen Ellen instead of moving to Rogers Park in Chicago with more Asians, et cetera, et cetera? This was because I was 18 and in college, and all of this head full of kind of radical spangles was what I had. This would all be kind of combined with the class critique of my father, and I would go home and, my dad banned the word bourgeois from the house. I couldn't come home for Thanksgiving if I wanted to use that word. My dad looked up at me my second or third year in college and said, Eboo, I understand what you're saying. He said, I'm not stupid. I'm one of the first Indians in a senior position in corporate advertising in Chicago. And I started at Leo Burnett in the late 1970s. I understand exactly what you're talking about. But it strikes me that whenever you talk about diversity, you talk about race, ethnicity, gender, class, sometimes sexuality. These things are all hugely important. But do you not read the newspaper? Do you not watch the evening news? Because the type of diversity you never talk about is the type that's blowing the world up. And that's religion. And he was right. This was the mid-1990s, and as I started paying attention to the news and reading the New York Times, it was religious conflict in the Balkans. It was religious conflict in Northern Ireland. It was religious conflict in the Middle East. In the mid-late 1990s, India explodes a nuclear bomb, calls it the Hindu bomb. Pakistan explodes a nuclear bomb, calls it the Muslim bomb. In sociology classes in college, in dorm room discussions, the word religion and religious diversity might have come up, 5 times throughout my whole college career. I thought to myself, why are we missing out on one of the great stories of this era, which is that it seems that too often when people from different religious communities gather in close quarters, there's conflict.
I was still writing late at night, even though I was retired from the military. I was doing other things, working for other employers, and was still busy. So I'd write late at night. And when I'd come back to bed late in the evening, if my wife was awake, my dear wife Melanie, I would say, if she moved at all, I'd say, Melanie, take a look at what I've written and give me some feedback, which she did wonderfully. But one night, about several chapters into the book, I came home, and I came back to bed, and she moved, and I said, hey, but I didn't say, look at what I've written. I said, Melanie, I don't know what I'm doing with this thing. I don't know who is going to want to read this. It seems like it's nothing but a series of unfortunate events. It's a bunch of bad stuff that happened to a guy, and I just can't imagine anybody wants to read this. She didn't hesitate. She said, Bill, you need to finish this book. She said, I know the whole story. I know how it ends. I know that it's a story of hope and courage. It's a story that is motivational. I think it's going to be motivational for people who face difficulties in life and possibly inspirational, and go get your book done. So I did. I went back and wrote it and finished it. But her comments caused me to do a few things with the book. One, and I was always weird about this when I started writing, I didn't want this to be just my story. I wanted it to tell the story of this different experience, this different perspective, but I wanted it to tell that broad story. So one thing that I did in relating the events that happened to me, I also share the stories of the other prisoners of war captured in South Vietnam and Laos through our conversations that we had when I met those guys. My work with NATO is working with NATO Special Operations forces in leadership development. That grew out of some work that I did after retirement when I got my doctoral degree. I was for a time on the staff, on the faculty of the U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies at Fort Leavenworth, where we got into leadership big time. When I left that, came out to the West Coast, I did the same or similar things for Stryker Brigade combat teams at Fort Lewis, and then had an opportunity about 6 years ago to be part of a leadership program for NATO Special Operations, which, based on my limited Special Operations support experience in Vietnam, I jumped at. And the work that we do principally and very simply is to take NATO Special Operations operators, guys who are NATO Special Operations guys, who are masters at the tactical situation. They can do raids, they can do snatches, they do all the things that you read about Special Forces guys doing, Special Operations guys doing. And the leadership program that I'm involved in tries to take them from, and we get them mid-grade officers, senior non-commissioned officers, to take them from that tactical mastery and bring them up to a level of operational and strategic excellence where they can perform at higher levels.